Hi there, my name is Stacey Goldring, and I am the facilitator of Chapter Endnotes Book Club. Welcome this morning, this afternoon, today, this evening, whenever you happen to hop onto this YouTube video. We're going to discuss The Last Castle by Denise Kiernan. Just like the book says at the bottom, it is the epic story of love, loss, and American royalty in the nation's largest home, translated. It is the story about how George and Edith Vanderbilt created Biltmore House, and then what happens once George passes on and it is left to Edith to either close down, be torn down like a lot of the other Biltmore mansions in New York City, or thrive. And the big spoiler is, obviously, you can go visit Biltmore today, and it is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful estate nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Asheville, North Carolina. I highly recommend that you make that trek. It'll be well worth it. All right, let's get started. A little bit about the author so you can understand the voice when you read this book. And I will also tell you my readers' responses to this book thus far. Denise Kiernan is an author, journalist, and producer, and host of Craft Authors and Conversations, which I'm sure is exactly what it sounds like. Let me get my notes better together. You may recognize the author. She wrote the bestseller from a few years ago called Girls in the Atomic City. I have not read that. Also, Signing Their Lives Away came out in 2009. The Fame and Misfortune of Men Who Signed the Declaration of Independence. How fun is that? She's also wrote several books about Thanksgiving and about how to make money for if you're a freelancer. I need to get that book. All right, moving on. She is incredibly well published also in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Village Voice, Rolling Stone, Breath, Time, Ms. Magazine, Sever, Reader's Digest, Discover. If you ever watch the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, she was the head writer for the first season of that show. She's also produced for ESPN and MSNBC. You've heard her. She has been on NPR's Weekend Edition, PBS's NewsHour, MSNBC's Morning Joe, Jon Stewart, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Her awards take up half a page, so lots of awards. She graduated and got her master's from NYU. So we're looking at we're taking a nonfiction look at the Biltmore estate. It is the largest privately owned estate in all of the United States. And here's some questions. Yeah, if you're a book club facilitator, this will be fun, because here's a few questions that you can ask your own book club attendees. Did you like the book? Did you find it dull or interesting? Did it hold your attention? Could you keep up with it? You know, there's a lot of Corneliuses. Have you been to the Biltmore? And also, what parts did you find interesting? So I'm going to answer the last one by saying I found two characters interesting, both whom I've never known before. And we do know a lot of people that walk in and out of the pages of the book. And those two people are Edith Dresser, George's wife, and also Cornelia, their daughter. So let's put pins in that. We'll get back to that later. Not pins as in voodoo dolls, pins, and let's not forget that. The overarching idea or context of this book stood out to me when I realized that the house was only built. So the Biltmore was only built. Let's see, the 60s, like 30 years. Would that be 30 years? Yeah, 30 years or 40 years after the Civil War ended. I mean, take a look at it's such a beautiful place that landed in our nation at such a quick time after we had just finished going through the worst bloody civil war our country had ever seen up until that point. Just remarkable. All right. So a little bit about how the Vanderbilts came to be, so you can understand exactly why George and Edith had such wealth and were able to live in such opulent surroundings. So the original Vanderbilt came over poor from Holland, and he had a son, Cornelius. Cornelius borrowed $100 from his mother when he was 16 years old and bought a boat to ferry people back and forth from the island to from Staten Island to Manhattan. That small ferry boat ended up being a fleet of ferries, and then he matriculated over to the railroads. When I think about how the Vanderbilts have affected our lives of normal Americans today, I think back to when I was young and when things would get very busy at the home, my mother would yell, "It's like Grand Central Station in here." Well, it is Cornelius, and it's either Cornelius or his son, Bill, I believe it's Bill Vanderbilt, who indeed built Grand Central Station. So they have become part of the vernacular of our lives. Never mind the fact that the railroads transported goods and people and connected the United States as it had never, ever been connected before. When the Commodore married, that became his nickname, the first Cornelius Vanderbilt that we're going to speak about. He married his first cousin in 1813. They had 13 children, 11 of which survived to adulthood. He also had 3 sons that survived until adulthood, although George, his favorite, died in the Civil War in 1864. At the time of his death, his 2 remaining living boys, William or Billy and Cornelius, did little to inspire their father, the Commodore. He often called his son William a fool or a blatherskite. Had Cornelius himself committed to an asylum, not on 1, but 2 occasions. So the Commodore ended up leaving the bulk of his money to William or Bill, but not before telling him, quote, "Any fool can make a fortune, but it takes a man of brains to hold on to it," unquote. These are prescient words because the Vanderbilts basically lost everything when we come to the present, unlike the Rockefellers, which if we have time, we'll discuss. The Vanderbilt fortune was once worth equal to $185 billion. Okay. So after William dies in 1855, that's the Commodore's son, the family members who inherit it start squandering it. So when we get to the 1970s, none of the remaining Vanderbilts, about 120, depending on your source, had even a mere measly $1 million to their name. Well, I'd be remiss if I did not mention Anderson Cooper. As you probably know, he is a Vanderbilt, his mother, the famous designer, Gloria Vanderbilt. Anderson Cooper wrote a book a few years ago about his family, and if you're interested in that, it's called Vanderbilt, The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty. Anderson claims there wasn't much left of the fortune when his mother, Gloria, passed away in 2019. She was the last direct descendant to the Commodore. He said that he will not inherit anything. In an article, in an interview with Howard Stern, he said, quote, "My mom made it clear to me that there's no trust fund and I don't believe in inheriting money." Well, that's a very easy thing to say, particularly if you have quite the plum job working at CNN, making what is estimated to be at least $12 million a year. He calls inherited money an initiation sucker and a curse. And, you know, looking at his family history, you can understand that. Quote, he says, "I'm a big believer in the corrosive effects, the cancerous effects of that kind of money." He goes on to say that his family squandered their dollars, calling it conspicuous consumption. And of course, if you've watched The Gilded Age, which is a very popular series right now on television, or have watched the documentary, The Gilded Age, part of the American Experience series on America's PBS, then you can understand and you have had great exposure to that gilded age of conspicuous consumption. And remember what gilded means. It may be all gold and sparkly on the outside, but on the inside, it's worthless. Okay. Just wrapping up on our dear Anderson. He always had a job growing up, and despite his mother's wealth, he felt he identified more with his father, who grew up poor in Mississippi. So again, if you're interested in Anderson's book, it is called Vanderbilt, The Rise and Fall of an American Democracy. Well, I digress from the book itself, so we're going to get back to our book called The Last Castle. All right, so what I plan to do is give you a bit of a timeline, because I think that will help us kind of follow the book. The book itself, basically, the first parts talk about the Vanderbilts' rise to their wealth. The rest of the book is dedicated to George, who is a descendant of Cornelius. Cornelius, the Commodore, was his grandfather, and Edith Stuyvesant Dresser Vanderbilt, that's who George marries, how they come to build the Biltmore estate, their life at the Biltmore, and when George dies, it is up to Edith to carry on the Biltmore legacy. And I believe it's because of her that the Biltmore was positioned well to be the Biltmore that we know today. Okay, so picture all of this. First of all, let me give you a date for the Commodore. He was born on Staten Island in 1862. Okay, so that's just so you can understand where on the landscape he is in relation to our George. George visits, so that was his grandfather. Is that right? No, it's not. That is our George. Sorry, I'm getting them all confused. Okay, so George is born in 1862. You know, this is the fourth time that I've facilitated this book club, and I'm no good at dates. So between the two of these things, I'm so grateful to be here and tell you about this book. But the idea that I'm messing up dates from here on out should never surprise you ever. In fact, just expect it. But I do have them written down. So if I can actually say them out loud and in the right order, it will be a Christmas miracle. Okay. 1862, he is born on Staten Island. He is the grandson of the Commodore. In 1888, George he's a mama's boy. He loves his mother. He's not too interested in dating. He doesn't have to work. So he loves the arts and he loves reading. So what's not to like? Anyway, he and his mother go on a visit to Asheville. And he is captivated the first time he sees the Blue Ridge Mountains. And they are captivating. They're absolutely mystical. There's a reason why Tom Wolfe called Asheville Arcadia. There is something so mystical, beautiful about the place. Okay, so he considers the area as a location for his new country home and scoops up very quietly a lot of land. And it's not quiet for long, because residents start to realize that someone is gobbling up their land. It kind of reminds me of what happened with Disney in the late 60s and early 70s in Orlando. There should be a good book about that. I know that Carl Hyacin wrote a book about that. Anyway, I digress. Okay, moving on. If you know a Disney book that's similar to this experience, this book, let me know what that is in the comments below. Thank you. Okay, so anyway, they begin purchasing land, and who does he hire to build his little country home? That would be the famed Richard Morris Hunt. And then who does he hire to do a little landscaping? Frederick Law Olmsted of Central Park fame. All right, in 1896, his mother passes away. George is now 34 and starts to consider settling down, which comes to a surprise to his friend who is featured throughout the book. That is William Bradhurst Osgood Field. Gotta love these names. Who says to his mother, when he hears that his friend George is looking to settle, he says to his mother, I think his attachment, in whatever quarter it might lie, would be on the basis of business, as the rest hardly comes into his constitution, unquote. So there has been some discussion in our book groups about George's sexual orientation. It really has nothing to do with this book. I couldn't find anything, nor does it matter. What we love about George, and I'll just fast forward here a minute, is that in the Biltmore, he had upward of 24,000 books in his library, which was 2 stories high. Gotta love them. Okay, so construction begins construction begins in 1889. He does marry Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, who becomes Edith Vanderbilt. He builds a home based on the design of a French Renaissance chateau. It is based on the Chateau du Bois in the Loire Valley. It's the largest undertaking of residential architecture in our country. It takes 6 years, and there are many craftsmen who come together to build the home, build the grounds, and the gardens, and they're all the best. They're the best bricklayers, sculptors, artisans, environmental experts, etc. So I can just imagine that Christmas Eve in 1895, 6 years later, where everyone gathers to celebrate in their new home. In 1898, George marries Edith after the house is open. I'm sorry about that. No. I have those 2 reversed. I'm very sorry about that. They marry in 1898. Then Christmas Eve happens. Anyway, moving on. Okay, in the year 1900, which makes it very easy to keep track of, their only daughter, Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, is born at Biltmore. She is their only child. It is a celebrity birth. It's covered all over the world, absolutely all over. The same year, we're looking at an estate that isn't just pretty, although it is. That same year, we have construction on their dairy and horse barns. This is going to be a self-sustaining ecosystem. When they build the house, they build their own factory. They build their own railroad. They have their own, I know it's K-I-L-N. I call it a kiln, even though I know it's pronounced a kill. So they're making whatever it takes to make it happen. Okay, so they have construction begins, and this horse barn is a thriving social and work center for all the families that are living at the Biltmore. And today it remains a connection to the Biltmore's past. It is still there. In 1914, George Vanderbilt passes away. He's only 51. And Cornelia and her mom are left roaming that home. He is buried at the Vanderbilt Family Mausoleum in Staten Island. And he leaves a legacy of philanthropy behind that Edith takes up. But she has to make the mansion viable. In order to keep it going, she needs to start selling off a lot of the land. So she sells off approximately 87,000 acres of their estate. So today there's only 8,000. And she sells it to the United States Forest Service for less than $5 an acre. Today, we know that as the heart of, or the beginning of, Pisgah National Forest. And this includes the Cradle of Forestry, one of our first national forests east of the Mississippi. So Cornelia marries in 1924 the Honorable John Francis Amherst Cecil, and they are married in Biltmore Village at All Souls Church. And it is her mother who escorts her down the aisle. Their son is born the following year, aptly named George, born in the same room where Cornelia herself was born at the Biltmore. They welcome a second son 3 years later. They then open up the house to the public because they need to make money. And the public requests these tours, and they figure it's a way to bring tourism to the area during the Depression. And the income will also help preserve the estate. Interestingly, during World War II, it was at the Biltmore House where paintings from our National Gallery here in the US, priceless paintings were stored in order to be safe during the war. I thought that was just a little bit of a very interesting tidbit I wanted to throw in there. So I'm just going to leave this here for now and return a little bit to some very fun facts now about the Biltmore. And if you want to learn more about the Biltmore from that period going forward, I highly suggest you visit the Biltmore's website. It has a wonderful timeline, beautiful photographs, and images from the archives of the estate. Just fantastic. Okay, so why is it called Biltmore? Like I said earlier, I believe that the Vanderbilts came from Holland, and we know exactly where they came from in Holland because of their name. They are the Vanderbilts. They're from Bilt or de Bilt, from the Bilt, I think, which is in the Utrecht area, near Utrecht. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. So when he went to name the Biltmore, he used the word built and more, which refers to rolling mountainous countryside, or you may say it has to describe their spending. Today, it still remains America's largest private residence. It took around $6 million to build the estate at the time. And like I said, it took 6 years to complete. I've told you the numbers of the library books, up to 24,000, depending on your source. But let me tell you a few other fun numbers. George read 80 books a year, and he recorded them all in his journal. There are 4 acres of floor space in the mansion, 175,000 square feet to be exact. There are 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces. All told, there are 250 rooms in this country home. The estate now sits on 800 acres of land. To give you an idea, that is 3 times the size of Washington, D.C. It used to be the size of 95 football fields. So just think about that. You can strap on your hiking boots and hike around the Biltmore because they have 22 miles of hiking trails today. The home itself has a bowling alley and also a 70,000-gallon indoor swimming pool. Okay, so Henry James, among others, are featured in this book. There are so many famous people that make cameos in this book. I was surprised I didn't see Alfred Hitchcock walk by. But here is a little something that Henry James, one of the few people who didn't like the house, had to say about it. He said he had problems finding a bathroom, and he says the Biltmore was, quote, a colossal, heartbreaking house, unquote, seemingly built, quote, based on a fundamental ignorance of comfort and wondrous deludedness, unquote. The Biltmore tried everything to make money. They had a dairy, they farmed, etc. It wasn't until 1969 where they finally had a profit of $16.32. This can be found in the epilogue of the book. The home itself has many secret passageways, as lots of grand homes do, also secret trapdoors. Today, we would consider it a smart house. It was one of the first to be powered by electricity, which makes it, one of the perks of being friends with Thomas Edison, which George was. They started with DC and then they converted to AC, electric power. It is said to be one of the first houses to have an elevator. However, I've seen that before for other homes, so I don't know. But what's interesting, if you read Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, a wonderful book that came out years ago, it's about the 1863 World's Fair. a lot, so many people attended that, and we see a lot of those characters again showing up in the book, such as Otis, who makes the elevator, and also Frederick Law Olmsted, who George hired to build all the grounds. Now, I'm going to I want to hold how I felt about the book when I read it, because what's most important is how you felt about the book. But I will tell you, I have to share that I enjoyed learning all about the gardens, how they were created by Frederick Law Olmsted, and the wonderful way that sometimes when clouds do have a silver lining, and when our I would say our heroine of the book, and that would be Edith, had to sell off a large portion of the land in order to keep the mansion going. It went to Pisgah National Forest. How grateful I am today that we have this wonderful national treasure in North Carolina. One of the takeaways that I did have from the book, and I hope when you read it, you will have your own. My most special was realizing that the first time I've been there twice. So the first time I went there, I was so taken by making the drive up once you enter the estate, and you drive up and you're just engulfed in nature and these wonderful trees. You're in your own sanctuary. You park your car and then you make your way over to a pathway that leads you to all of a sudden this grand expanse, which is the estate. And you take that all in to understand when you read the book that every bit of that experience was planned, was envisioned, was orchestrated by Frederick Law Olmsted. It absolutely takes my breath away. It's one thing to look at a painting that is one-dimensional, but to physically be in his art and have that entire experience. Today they have like those Van Gogh immersive experiences or whatever they are, but this is the real thing with Mother Nature. My respect for Frederick Law Olmsted grows every single day. So that being said, I want to pose another question to you, which is basically, do you believe that the house is haunted? So although not mentioned in the book, all over the interweb, you will find information that delves into this. Well, the short answer is no, but some things people do claim they have heard or experienced are the following: that they report unexplained footsteps, doors opening and closing, cold spots, apparitions, and ghostly figures seen in parts of the house, and they hear Edith calling for George, oh George. Which I can imagine they probably did a lot of in a house like that. Anyway, I think that gives me a chuckle. Okay, so today you can take a tour of the Biltmore house, which would make Edith very happy. And you can also take a private tour. And I did do this a few years ago, and it was very fun because you're allowed to go up on the roof and you can get like a really close-up view on the beautiful masonry or stonework, whatever it's called, of all the gargoyles. You get a close-up view of the beautiful copper that's, I don't know, it's all very green now. I think that's what it's all turned, the patina is all green now. That has the G and the V for George Vanderbilt. And you see their family crest, which they made up. Acorns and some leaves or something. She talks about it in the book, but you can see those also dispersed on the flashing and also all over the house. If you have seen the films or any of these films, then you have been at the Biltmore, because the following films have featured the Biltmore: Forrest Gump, Patch Adams, Being There, The Last of the Mohicans, Hannibal, and I'm Told Richie Rich. So how fun is that? Okay. Okay, there are two characters that I'd like to pull out for you and highlight out of many in the book. I mean, we have presidents walking through there. We have F. Scott Fitzgerald, that whole group. There are so many people. They did a lot of entertaining. So many people are featured in this book. But what gave me the biggest pleasure was when George and Hunt were examining what type of architecture that they would select for their home. They do mention Sissinghurst. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in the UK. And of course, this is the home that Edith Sackville West and her husband resuscitated and lived in. And that made me so happy because maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we read All Passion Spent. We may have a video on it. And of course, that written by the amazing Vita Sackville West. And if you've not read her, then maybe you just need to stop the video now and go get that book and read it. But I want to talk just for a little bit about Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, and then we will wrap for this session. So Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, later known as Cecil, then she took on the last name of Buckley Johnson, and then Goodsir. So this woman, she loved marriage. She loved it so much, she did it many times. Anyway, she was born, like I said, at the Biltmore, the only daughter of George and Edith. She inherits the estate, and her mother, like I said, has to sell off several, 80,000+ acres in order to keep it going. She attended the Madeira School for high school. She was also privately tutored. She only spent a year at UNC. At the age of 21, she receives an annuity for $2 million. At 25, she receives her full inheritance of $5 million. Her father inherited 10, and from that, he built the Biltmore and a home in New York City. A townhouse. Okay, in 1924, so I know, yay, that means she's 24. She marries the British aristocrat, the first secretary of the British Embassy of Washington, the Honorable John Francis Amherst Cecil. They have 2 children, George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil and William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil. This is why I do feel this book needed a family tree, because there's a lot of names that are passed around, and you can tell even by me, it gets confusing very quickly. She finds Biltmore dull in 1932 after they get married. So she, mother of 2, moves to New York City to study art. Then in 34, she moves to Paris, never to return to the US, let alone step foot in the Biltmore. And she divorces her husband after 10 years of marriage. It is John Cecil who spends the rest of his life managing Biltmore after Edith leaves this dear earth until his death in 1954. So I found this article published in 1938 in the American Weekly, and it is entitled Cornelia Vanderbilt's Peculiar Love Problem. Now, our author does talk a little bit about this in the book, but I just had to find out a little bit more. So the article implies that Cecil's interest in the estate left Cornelia bored. The article says, quote, before marriage, her days had been so full of the details of managing the estate, I would add with her mother, that she hardly had time to think. But with Mr. Cecil taking over the cows and employees, the usual outlet for her energy was abruptly cut off, unquote. So newspaper reports at the time are hinting that she has a wee bit of a bohemian spirit. So it's then noted, and I couldn't find a picture anywhere of this, even though I know it would be black and white still. She dyed her hair a bright pink, explaining that it was the proper color aura according to numerology, and changes her name to Nilka. So I think we need a whole documentary on Cornelia. And again, if there is one out there, I'm sure you will let me know. Okay, so then so she spends time in Greenwich Village, and then she travels to Europe, and she gets into a lengthy, and I'm just going to say complicated, we're going to leave it there, with the Swiss artist named Guy Behr. If you want to know more, just Google away. In 1949, her relationship ends with Behr, and she then ties the knot again that same year. She marries Captain Vivian Francis Buckley Johnson. He's 58. She's 49. Unlike the beautiful wedding that she has at the Biltmore, and the images, like I said, are all on their website. She gets married at a registry office in Kensington, and there are just 4 witnesses. She lives a quiet life. She goes by the name of Mary, and she's with him until he passes away in 1968. 1972, we're out to dinner, having a fine time. And she falls in love and marries a waiter. And his name is Robert Bill Goodsir. And she falls in love with him, and so they marry. She dies in 1976 at the age of 75 in England, just 4 years into the marriage. She's buried in an unmarked grave, the Orkney Islands. So she just wanted to do her own thing. She does have a philanthropy that you can actually, you can still apply for grants today, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that tells you a little bit about Cornelia. The author does a great job about telling us about the Gilded Age and all, the Astors and, all of those fancy people that were popular in that era. Again, I recommend those 2 one's a television series, one is a television documentary to learn more about the Gilded Age. But if you are planning to go to the Biltmore estate, I think this is a wonderful book for you to read. If you love history, I think this is a wonderful book to read. When you decide to dive into the pages of the book, please appreciate the choices that that Edith had to make after she was left a widow, and all of the management of the estate fell on her. She truly supported women artisans. She supported education. The farm, the estate, Asheville, it was almost a borderline, as described in the book. I use the word utopian society, but it's not that I think everyone was like happy, but they really had all working facets of their own ecosystem. The author portrays that Edith was beloved by those who worked for her. Edith goes on to remarry and have a career as the wife of a congressman, and a very successful one at that. If Edith had lived in the 20th century, some people say she reminds them of like an Eleanor Roosevelt figure. She had her own, she paved her own path. She had a lot of influence. So I hope you'll pick up The Last Castle by Denise Kiernan. It's a perfect book. There you go. It's a perfect book if you love history, if you love American history, if you love architecture, and if you love learning about, the closest thing we have to royalty. I don't know, probably the Kennedy. There is a relation to the Kennedys as well in this book, and it has to do with the younger generation. Someone marries in who's related to Jackie Onassis Kennedy, or Jackie Kennedy Onassis. But it definitely is a who's who, and it captures a certain place in time. And remember, this also comes from an immigrant experience. It's someone who came here with nothing, the great-grandfather in this case, and his wealth, his ingenuity, his ruthlessness, his wily business ways led to building something like this, which a consequence of is we have a wonderful, wonderful forest. We have Pisgah National Forest. That to me is a true gift. So thank you very much. I appreciate you spending your time with me today. And always feel free to recommend anything that you think would be worth discussing in the comments below. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.